Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well this weekend. It's a beautiful day at my house. I hope the sun is out at your house. So we're entering into week 4 for our class, and I hope it's starting to come together a little bit for you. Uh, I just wanted to bring this up. You should have gotten this as an email, and if you're around on campus, there's a few big, really interesting sessions coming up. One tomorrow. Let's see, and you should be able to see these if you want. I'm not sure if these are going to be zoomed if you're distant, but look into it. It's probably the case that they will zoom these things if people are interested in hearing about it. And as you can see, a lot of these are pretty cool. The intersection of data and photojournalism, well, that's an RIT thing, photojournalism. We've been doing that for a really long time. And how we bring data into that, well, that's a good question. Learning to program by transforming data into information visualization. Don't we have a course about that someplace or another? And that might be interesting too. Be My Valentine, data visualization in Tableau. If you're interested in Tableau, there you go. And then citizen archivists, empowering student-run organizations to preserve their history. Well, maybe that one's not the coolest for our class, but the others certainly are interesting. So this might be a fun thing for you to look into. And like I said, if you're on campus, you should stop by and see what's going on. So announcements for this week. Well, my regular office hours and stuff, and if you want to talk to me, I'm happy to chat with you. What I forgot to put in here is that your first assignment is due on Friday. I hope everything's going well with that, and that you're slugging away with it and getting yourselves organized and stuff. Now, the thing to think about at this point is that we've got just this last week to work on that first e-commerce project. Well, if you're the project manager for the Chicago Crime Project, you might want to start getting resources ready for your team so that when the time comes to work on the Chicago Crime Data project, you're ready to go. And so some of the things that you might be interested in looking into, particularly if you're the project manager, are things like, what about this field of crime information? What are the big challenges with preventing crime? That's the goal of crime prevention. Crime data is to make it so that we don't have so much crime. Well, how do we go about doing that? What's the current thinking? It used to be if we were really tough on crime and threw criminals into jail for decades for small offenses, that other bad people in the world would get that message and decide, well, maybe I don't want to be a crime boss, or maybe I don't want to do that criminal thing I was thinking about doing. I don't know that that's the current thinking, though. At the moment, I think there's a lot of change happened around the drug laws, mostly because what happened was that small-time criminals, people who just did something knuckleheaded, got thrown in jail for a really long time and missed out on their community. And so, they spent their formative years in jail, and you don't learn it much in jail except how to be a better criminal. So, that could be, changes related to that could be interesting for you. And so those big questions, the big challenges may be changing over time also. So kind of interesting. What are the trends in analyzing crime data? There's lots of people out there. This is a big deal. And everybody through the FBI, sponsored by the FBI and things in the U.S., has been paying a lot more attention to data related to crime. Well, what are they doing with it? What do those crime reports look like? We hear about them on the news sometimes, but what does it really look like? What's the visualizations of that crime data really doing? And how are people looking at this data in new ways? What's the background? What's the universe of questions around and reports and analyses around crime data that are out there? What can you learn about the Chicago crime data set in BigQuery? You've got a ton of different fields in there. What do they all mean? Where can your team go to find out what those different fields actually mean and how they relate to each other? What are the resources out there? Those are all good questions. And then, what should the project manager for the Chicago Crime Data Project be working on right now? Well, these are some of the things you need to think about. Now, I might have mentioned it to you guys before, but I might not have. And that's it. I kept thinking about, what's the best tool to keep track of this information, particularly around other reports related to similar data sets or similar ideas and stuff. And it dawned on me in class, I thought, you know what? This is a Pinterest thing. Pinterest is about putting together a place to share images and some discussion. You can, add captions and things to Pinterest, and people use it for all kinds of things. My wife and I enjoy working on our house, and so there's always when she sees something that would be an interesting addition to our house, or interesting color for a wall, or interesting new lights, or whatever it is, she puts it on Pinterest, and it allows her to keep track of the things that are inspirational to her, and perhaps aspirational also. And yet, that's mostly from a very visual perspective. And that's kind of exactly what tool you're looking for to make it so that you can get through this class and do the best job that you can on the projects that we have upcoming. So maybe that's a good tool for you, maybe not. I mean, entirely up to you. Your lab 2, the e-commerce, if you have any questions about that, I haven't heard many questions from anybody. Please let me know. I'm happy to help out wherever I can. Let's see, what can I say? Oh, the probably the most important thing I would point you at is that 12 metrics for e-commerce that I posted to my courses. That's got really good stuff in there. And if you look through those and start to think about what are the goals for an e-commerce company, I think that will help you a lot. Also, I think the lecture that I'm doing right today may be helpful to you as you start to organize yourself and start getting your wireframes and all that stuff together to put together your e-commerce project. So anyhow, let me know if you have any questions. Let's see, what else can I add? Creativity, use your creativity in this stuff, and think about all of the different aspects of what you're putting together. I gave you a ballpark of at least 6 different graphic elements in your dashboard. I think that's fair. I think that less than that, and you'd end up just coming up with one metric for something that doesn't feel like a one metric question to me. So I think you should think about the kinds of graphic elements that you're going to have in there. You're doing a comparison of 2 regions, but when looking at the server load generated from those 2 different regions means that you're going to have to think about things like what happens if one region buys more things but has less page views, or what happens if one region buys a lot of the same stuff but the other region buys a lot of different stuff. Those are different loads on the servers just because 100 pairs of socks that are all exactly the same. That's a really easy thing for your servers to handle. But if you did 100 pairs of socks, but they're all different kinds of pairs and different sizes and different colors and all that stuff, that's a very different kind of a load on the server because you've got 100 different lines that need to be worked through the system versus one line that has a quantity of 100. And even though the revenue generated by those two separate transactions may be the same, the load on the servers is going to be different. So you're not going to find two regions that are exactly the same, but one of the things that you have to dig into is this question of how do I judge which regions generate a similar workload on our servers. I'm not looking for you to be an operations person and know the different loads that are put on servers, but I do think that you can come up with something that's pretty good from a ballpark perspective, just from thinking about what would it mean for the two different regions to put all this inventory together and ship it out the door. So any questions, let me know. I'm happy to work with you. I'm really excited about seeing what you guys come up with. So today I want to start using our textbook that I asked you to purchase for the class, Storytelling with Data. And if you haven't gotten it yet, it won't kill you. It's not hard to read. It's got really good stuff in here that I wish all of my students would read because it gets at this whole idea of how to work with different graphic elements to convey a story. Because that's how humans interact with each other. We're very tied into our stories, and when you're trying to persuade someone of something, you're best off to use a story and build context and think about what it is that you're going to show these people to help them to better understand your perspective on things. And I think the Storytelling with Data text does a really good job of that. So if you don't have it yet, get it. It's not going to kill you, and it will probably make you a more effective presenter no matter what you end up doing in your career. So today we're going to talk about just the beginning information in the Storytelling with Data text, and kind of think about this idea of context, because I think that's one of the important things around this first e-commerce project that you're working on, is understanding the context of what e-commerce people are really interested in. It's not just how do we race to the most money. There's more to it than that. And marketing and operations and control issues, all of those things come up around e-commerce, and they're all important for you to understand if you're an analyst that has to deal with e-commerce related information. So the key steps to weave a good story from data that Cole Nussbaumer, is that her last name? Let me find it. Nussbaumer. I'm going to call her Nussbaumer. I think that's the appropriate one. Use the first of what appears to be two last names. So I'm going to call her Nussbaumer. So what Nussbaumer says are the key steps to weave a good story from data. Begin with understanding the context. Where in the whole process of life is the story that you want to weave from this data. And weaving, I think, that's a good analogy to use in here. You're not telling, you're not yelling, you're not doing any of that stuff. You're weaving a good story from data. But understanding the context, where does all this stuff fit together? Choosing an appropriate display of the information that you want to convey, that's important too. Eliminating clutter, and clutter in this case is information that doesn't need to be there, that doesn't add to the discussion. Whenever I'm doing lectures, whenever I'm writing, whenever I'm thinking about things, when you're editing, just as an example, you all have to write a senior project at the end of capstone project. There you go. You have to write a capstone project, so you're going to end up doing a bunch of writing. Well, the first step when you go to edit, you write your text down. A good approach is just to hammer it out and get a draft down. Just sit down and in an hour type out the whole thing, if you can, or a whole section or whatever. And then put it down for a day or two, and then come back and pick it up and go through and eliminate all the adjectives, all the phrases that modify your nouns. So, if you're talking about a really big display or a really big data set, just knock out really big and just leave it a big data set. And take out all that extra stuff. What is that? That's verbal clutter. It doesn't really add to make a comment about how really big the data set is. If you want to convey the size of the data set, talk about the size of the data set. How many rows? How many columns? Just say the words. Just eliminate the clutter from your discussion by getting rid of adjectives, and don't include information that doesn't add. Anything that's in there should add to the discussion. Make it so that your reader can better understand what your point is. Draw attention where you want it. We'll see this when you start doing your graphic displays and stuff, and you'll be thinking about what colors draw attention better than other colors. Well, red is the traditional pay attention to me kind of a color, but you can overdo it and have too much red. Or the red can just be too bright and it makes everybody just kind of like, too bright. So drawing attention where you want it, but doing it in a way that lets you think like a designer. Think about how colors relate to each other, what colors look good together, how does the layout enhance your ability to get your point across. And then last of all, and probably most important, tell a story. Humans love stories. We are a couple of thousand years away from sitting underneath an olive tree with Socrates, but as humans, we're not that far away, and that's what the Socratic method was, that Socrates would sit underneath an olive tree with his students all around him. He would pose a question, and then he would ask questions of his students to help them think through the questions that he had asked. That's telling a story. That works with humans. Humans understand that way of learning. So, good way, the key steps to weave a good data with data: tell a story. Make it into a story, not just a report. So today we're going to talk about understanding the context, because I wanted to break this up. I'm trying to make my videos shorter, because I think those work better. That's why I'm doing it. So first steps, understand the context. Questions that you might ask to ground the context of your explanatory work. Now, you're going to do exploratory work also, but first off, before you start exploring your data, you should start thinking about explaining your data. What is it that you're trying to do? To whom are we communicating? who is it? Are these people who understand this data, who have lived with the data for years and years, made their career using this data? Or are they people who this may be the first time they've seen the data, or they only have a glancing background in this data? That's a very different kind of an audience that you're trying to communicate to. And thinking about whom are we communicating with is a large part of making sure our communication works. What do we want the audience to know or do? That's usually the point of all of these presentations that you're going to do. It's to get your audience to know or do something. And so you need to think about, what is it that you want your audience to know or do? Should they, based on your work, should they come up with a new marketing plan for your e-commerce company? Or should they know that crime in Chicago is ascendant, it's going up, or it's going down, which is what's happened in most major cities over the last couple of years. Crime is really just kind of going away in most major cities, and New York City particularly has one of the lowest crime rates in any major city in the country. So it's really a very safe place. But what do you want your audience to know or do? Do you want them to know that sales of certain products on your e-commerce site are going up, or that your inventory levels are too low given the fact that you're going to start a marketing campaign for this product? Or what do you want them to know or do? There should be an action that you want from your readers, from your watchers, from your whatever, after you present your information to them. And how can we make use of the data to make the point? Where in our data is that point? How can we take the data that we have to persuade our watchers, users, listeners that they should know or do the thing that you're asking them to know or do? So digging for context, this is an important and sometimes very difficult thing to do. How do you, especially if you're new to the group that you're presenting with, if they're from the same company as you, but they have a completely different job requirements than you do. Maybe they're from the technology group and you're from the marketing group, or vice versa. You work in technology, they work in marketing. You have to understand where the people come from, and that can be a hard thing to do. What are the big challenges that face the people you're presenting to that should help to inform you so that you know something about what your audience is thinking about? And that's an important part of how you get started. So questions that can aid us are things like, what background information is relevant or essential? That's where, when I was talking about the Chicago crime stuff, it was, what's going on with crime information these days? How are people perceiving what level of crime is going on out there, and the information that they can use to help to understand what role crime plays in their daily lives these days. Who's the decision maker? If you look out at an audience, you may not know who the decision maker is in that audience. And what do you know about that person that makes the decision makers? Often you have a whole bunch of people and they all have a small role in making a decision, but at the end of the day, one person does that. Well, who is that? Do you know them? What's their background? Are they colorblind? Did they come from a particular part of your organization that would lead them to think in one way or another? What biases does our audience have that might make them supportive or resistant to our message? Well, what was that show's? It was a climate change movie, and it was like, what, the sky's falling or something like that. It was just out a few years ago, and these scientists kept trying to persuade politicians and the general public that, this is really serious. You need to do something about this. And people weren't paying attention to them. Well, what biases did your audience have when you're trying to convey something like climate change information and what they should do in response to a changing climate? What do you need to know about that audience so that you can do a better job to convey your information and persuade them to take the action that you have in mind? What data is available that would strengthen our case? Is our audience familiar with this data, or is it new? Data that might be available may not be in the data set that you're really working with. So if you think about Chicago crime, it may be that thinking about people migrating to or leaving Chicago is a big part of the discussion. Now, that may not be in the Chicago crime data set. Population levels for the whole city of Chicago, that's probably not in there. But you might want to find that out so you could say, listen, the crime is so bad, or crime levels are so good, that our population is falling or rising, depending on, what's going on. And that is true. People move to places or move away from places. I just read an article in the New York Times today that said that a lot of people are leaving the central U.S. They use Detroit as the example, not because of lack of jobs, because there's lots of jobs and stuff, but it was environmental pollution that was making them leave. Well, that's interesting. And if you're familiar with that data, that can have a big impact on what you're doing. So you wouldn't draw the conclusion, well, crime is going down and people are leaving our city, so therefore, people don't care about crime and they're leaving no matter, in spite of the fact that crime's going down. So you're drawing a correlation between two pieces of data that may not be correlated. The population going down in your city and the crime rate may not be driving people's decision. In fact, they may be leaving because of something else, like environmental pollution. So, what data is available that would strengthen our case? You'd have to think about that data outside of the regular data set and not try and draw inferences or especially correlation when in fact that may not be what you're looking for. Now, in this last one, this is something that you should always think about, kind of no matter what you're doing. What would a successful outcome look like? I think in class I talked about this, and I said that I used an example of, you meet some nice person and you want to get to know them better, and it's at some points in your life your successful outcome may look like just getting to know this person better and enjoying their company and having a nice time together. Great, that's successful outcome. Other times in your life, or whatever, you may be interested in something else happening, some more longer term relationship working its way out. It just depends. But what does success look like? And success what does success look like for your e-commerce report? What does success look like for your Chicago crime report? All of those may be very different. Communications that might help how do you organize this stuff? Well, some of the things that you might do are things like a 3-minute story, which is just a very concise story that contains all the important messages. How would you write that? Being concise, writing a short story is often much more difficult than writing a long story. And we talked before about eliminating the clutter and getting the adjectives out of your writing. In a 3-minute story, you have to really think about every word that goes in there. And it's kind of like the difference between a novel and a poem. Each word in a poem is really important in conveying information, and the poet thinks very carefully about each and every word in there. But a novelist may, go at a little different speed because, they've got lots of words in there, and they can, edit it later. So 3-minute story is a good way to do it. The big idea conveys the most important insight in a sentence. What is it that's the big idea that comes out of your work? And then finally, storyboarding, which is visually arranging the information in a sequence that you would want to present to an audience. Using a low-tech approach like writing down ideas on a piece of paper is usually a better approach when you're first starting out. And you might even do things like, write your information on a piece of paper and then cut it out with a pair of scissors and, start moving it around on a page. That's a really good technique in that it allows you to just, in a very tactile way, get a feel for what your story is going to look like. So that's a really good technique. And here's an example from your text that I think is a really good one. So the storyboard for this is the issue that they're interested in working with, and they have the issue in one sentence is kids have bad attitudes about science. That's a real change because a lot of times kids love science. They think it's the coolest thing in the world to learn about dinosaurs and fossils and chemistry and whatever it is. But if the issue is kids have bad attitudes about science, your first thing that you might want to do would be to demonstrate that issue actually exists. Show student assignment grades over a course of a year. This would show your audience that in fact, while kids may do well in English and art, they may be doing more poorly in their science courses, and that comes across through their grades. So that might be a way to demonstrate that in fact the issue that you're talking about actually is one worth paying attention to. Your next part of your presentation might be ideas for overcoming the issue, including a pilot program that may be the goal, what you want your audience to do as a result of your presentation might be to fund a pilot program that you have in mind. Your next slide might be describing the pilot program. What's it about? How does it work? What are the goals of that project, of that pilot program? And then after that, you may show before and after survey to demonstrate how successful the program has been in some small implementation that you may have already done. And then you'd finish your presentation with the recommendation. The pilot was successful. Let's expand it with more money. And so thinking about a storyboard for a presentation, this is a good example. It's very concise, it's well organized, it doesn't wander all over the place, it doesn't present information that's not relevant to your audience, it just does a good job. So as you think about how you're going to present information to as part of an analytics project, this might be a good inspiration for you in helping to get yourself organized. So that's all I've got for today, for this week, really, for you guys. And so if you have any questions, I look forward to hearing from you. Remember, your first project, second project, but first real project is due on Friday. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Have a good week, everybody. Take care.